In the shadowed corridors of power where empires once commanded the fate of millions, there lurks a silent truth. The most devastating collapses are rarely delivered by external swords alone. They are born from within, nurtured by hubris, neglect, and the slow erosion of the very foundations that once made a state invincible. Imagine the weight of marble halls, echoing with the footsteps of senators who believed their dominion would endure forever, only for it to crumble under the invisible weight of its own contradictions. This is the story of states that self-destructed, civilizations that turned the blade upon themselves in moments of irreversible rupture, reshaping the course of human history in ways that still echo through our modern world. The fall was never a single thunderclap, but a gathering storm of decisions, illusions, and overlooked fractures that turned prosperity into ruin. Across the vast expanse of time, from the sun-baked plazas of ancient Mesoamerica to the frozen steppes of the 20th century, certain states rose like colossi, only to implode through internal decay. The Western Roman Empire, the classic Maya city-states, and the Soviet Union stand as haunting archetypes of this pattern. Each built elaborate systems of control, ideology, and resource management that seemed eternal in their prime. Yet beneath the grandeur, quiet forces gathered: overextension, environmental strain, economic fragility, and political rot. These were not sudden invasions that toppled them overnight, but self-inflicted wounds that widened over decades, until the structures could no longer bear their own weight. The air in their capitals grew thick with unspoken anxieties, while leaders clung to facades of strength even as the ground shifted beneath them. No one fully grasped how deeply the internal contradictions ran, until the tipping point arrived. Before the unraveling, daily life in these societies pulsed with a deceptive rhythm of normalcy and ambition. In Rome, citizens navigated bustling forums where merchants haggled over spices from distant provinces, legions marched with disciplined precision, and aqueducts delivered fresh water to marble villas overlooking the Tiber. Farmers tilled expansive latifundia, worked by enslaved hands, while patricians debated philosophy and policy in heated baths. Among the Maya, in the dense jungles of the Yucatan, kings in elaborate headdresses presided over towering pyramids adorned with intricate carvings, as farmers tended maize fields and artisans crafted jade jewelry under the relentless tropical sun. The air hummed with the chants of priests and the sounds of ball games that mirrored cosmic struggles. In the Soviet era, factory workers in vast industrial complexes clocked in under portraits of Lenin, families gathered in communal apartments sharing rations, and the state promised a shining future of equality amid parades of military might. Routine masked the growing strains, fostering a false sense of permanence in the everyday. Yet even in these golden days, invisible warning signs flickered like distant lightning on the horizon. In Rome, inflation gnawed at the currency as emperors debased coins to fund endless campaigns, while corruption spread through the bureaucracy like cracks in an ancient aqueduct. Wealth concentrated in fewer hands, leaving the plebeians restless and the borders thinly defended by increasingly unreliable barbarian auxiliaries. For the Maya, prolonged periods of intensive agriculture began to strain the thin tropical soils. Deforestation for farmland and monumental construction altered local climates, and rival city-states engaged in subtle proxy conflicts over resources. Population pressures mounted in the urban centers, yet the divine kings continued rituals as if the gods remained appeased. In the Soviet Union, central planning created chronic shortages and inefficiencies hidden behind official statistics, while ethnic tensions simmered beneath the surface of enforced unity. Dissidents whispered in private, and the massive military budget drained resources from civilian needs, but the party line insisted on inevitable progress. These signs were there for those willing to see them, yet complacency prevailed. As years passed, rising tension and instability transformed these quiet warnings into audible tremors. Rome faced the crisis of the 3rd century, with rapid successions of emperors assassinated or overthrown, civil wars draining treasuries, and plagues decimating populations already weakened by malnutrition. Trade routes faltered, cities decayed, and the divide between rich and poor widened into chasms of resentment. The Maya lowlands witnessed intensified warfare between polities, as kings erected more stelae boasting victories, while drought cycles intensified, cracking the reservoirs and drying the cenotes that sustained life. Social hierarchies strained under the weight of elite demands for labor and tribute. In the Soviet bloc, stagnation deepened in the Brezhnev years, with black markets thriving and technological innovation lagging behind the West. Glasnost later unleashed pent-up grievances, exposing corruption and failures that had long been suppressed, while perestroika's half-measures only accelerated economic chaos. The once solid facade of the state began to show fissures that no propaganda could fully conceal. Key decisions and mistakes compounded the pressures, sealing the path toward failure. Roman emperors like Diocletian divided the empire into eastern and western halves for administrative ease, yet this fragmented authority and invited further rivalry. Heavy taxation and reliance on slave labor stifled innovation and internal markets, while alliances with barbarian groups proved double-edged. Maya rulers doubled down on monumental building projects and ritual warfare during times of scarcity, alienating their subjects and exacerbating environmental degradation through unchecked deforestation and soil exhaustion. Soviet leaders under Gorbachev pursued reforms intended to save the system, but inadvertently dismantled its controls. The arms race with the United States drained an already faltering economy, and reluctance to fully decentralize fueled nationalist movements in the republics. Each choice, made in the name of preservation or ideology, accelerated the internal contradictions rather than resolving them. The weight of history pressed down as leaders navigated blind to the gathering storm. Then came the moment the system began to fail, a threshold crossed not with dramatic fanfare but with accumulating ruptures. In the West, by the late 5th century, Rome's last emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed in 476 by the Germanic chieftain Odoacer, marking the symbolic end as central authority evaporated and provinces slipped away. The once mighty legions could no longer hold the frontiers. Among the Maya, between the 8th and 10th centuries, major centers like Tikal and Copan were abandoned as droughts intensified, trade networks collapsed, and populations dispersed or perished amid famine and conflict. Stelae inscriptions ceased, and pyramids fell silent. The Soviet Union unraveled with astonishing speed after the failed August 1991 coup against Gorbachev. Republics declared independence one by one. The red flag was lowered over the Kremlin on December 25th, and the world's largest communist state dissolved into 15 separate nations. What had seemed monolithic fractured along fault lines long ignored. The human consequences of these breakdowns were profound and harrowing. In Rome, once thriving cities saw populations plummet, infrastructure crumble, and knowledge preserved only in isolated monasteries as banditry and local warlords filled the vacuum. Families fled to rural strongholds, trade evaporated, and the light of classical learning dimmed for centuries. Maya societies fragmented into smaller groups, survivors adapted to new realities in the jungles and highlands, but the grand urban civilization with its sophisticated calendar and architecture largely vanished from the lowlands, leaving behind haunting ruins overtaken by vegetation. The Soviet collapse brought economic shock therapy, hyperinflation, and loss of social safety nets for millions. Ethnic conflicts erupted in places like the Caucasus, while ordinary citizens faced unemployment, shortages, and a sudden ideological void. Hope mixed with despair as old certainties dissolved, revealing the fragility of even the most imposing systems. In the aftermath, social breakdown revealed the depths of vulnerability. Trust in institutions evaporated as elites fled or were overthrown, leaving the masses to navigate chaos. Rome's fall ushered in the early Middle Ages, characterized by feudal fragmentation and cultural contraction. Maya communities experienced a diaspora and transformation, with power shifting northward and traditional kingship yielding to new forms. The Soviet dissolution triggered a painful transition to market economies, with oligarchs rising amid widespread poverty and a reconfiguration of global power that left Russia diminished yet influential. Throughout history, these ruptures exposed how interconnected the pillars of statehood truly are. When one weakens, the others soon follow in a cascade of failure. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sounds of adaptation and mourning. The long-term historical impact of these self-destructions reshaped continents and eras. Rome's collapse contributed to the birth of modern Europe through the synthesis of Roman law, Christian institutions, and Germanic traditions, influencing governance, language, and culture for millennia. The Maya legacy endured in descendant populations and archaeological wonders that continue to fascinate. reminding us of humanity's capacity for both brilliance and ecological short-sightedness. The Soviet end marked the close of the Cold War, accelerating globalization, the spread of democracy in some regions, and new geopolitical tensions that define our present. These events underscore a universal lesson. No state is immune to internal entropy when hubris blinds leaders to systemic weaknesses. Their stories serve as mirrors for contemporary societies grappling with similar pressures of inequality, environmental limits, and political polarization. Yet as we reflect on these fallen titans, a haunting question lingers in the quiet spaces between empires. What unseen fractures are widening beneath our own foundations today? The ruins stand as silent witnesses, their stones whispering of ambition's limits and the delicate balance required to sustain complex societies. In the end, states that self-destruct do not vanish without trace. They leave behind echoes that challenge us to learn, to adapt, and to confront our vulnerabilities before the tipping point arrives. The process of collapse is eternal in its patterns, a reminder that civilization's greatest threats often emerge not from distant enemies, but from within the hearts of its own people and the choices they fail to make. The wind moves through abandoned halls, carrying the weight of what was and what might yet be lost again.